Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, Play the Opinion Potomac Watch Podcast. That is, Play the Opinion Potomac Watch Podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with my colleagues Kim Strassel and Elliot Kaufman. Kim, I want to give you a chance to take the ungracious view of President Biden's comments, because I'm not convinced that there isn't this personal animus that Biden would really, from a personal point of view, like to see the collapse of this coalition government, which he considers and his administration considers to be very right-wing, and not willing to do the things that it wants on foreign policy and with the Palestinians. And in particular is something they worry about in regard to what Israel might do to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, I think that's right. And in addition to the history here, in addition to the pressure from progressives, it's simply the fact, look, he's a conservative politician and Biden is not. And you would like to see the president put that aside, given the long and important history between the country, the friendship there, given the amount of military aid we give to them, given the threat of in any way also, by the way, looking to undermine Israel in terms of what that then sends as a message to adversaries, not just of Israel, but ours, like Iran, for instance, and other hostile actors out there in the world. I am not going to be gracious at all. I think that this was deliberate. I think it is driven by animus, especially because if you add in a couple of things, look, we now know that Biden actually had a call with Netanyahu a week ago in which he expressed apparently some of this privately. There was no reason whatsoever to come out and do it publicly and after the fact, after Netanyahu had already dropped this, other than to try to undermine him at a time of a great deal of unrest in Israel and knowing as well that this coalition that Netanyahu has is somewhat fragile still and that some support has been dropping for it as well, given this issue. So I think it was designed to stir the pot. And as a result, I find it pretty outrageous behavior.
All right, Elliot, one other element I wanted to talk about, just get your view on, is this is the second U.S. ally, Israel being the closest ally, but the Saudis were also obviously have been a friend of the United States, ally in the Middle East. Not as close as Israel, but nonetheless somebody we have offered our support for over time and vice versa. But the president came into office saying, I want to make the crown prince a pariah. And the crown prince, no surprise, said, oh, okay, I'm going to take that rather personally. And now the Saudis are distancing themselves from the United States. And in that neighborhood, there's not a lot of friends we have. And yet the president is taking on, criticizing those governments in a way that in the Saudi case has caused them to now move in the direction of China and Russia and essentially make us not the principal ally, but just one of several countries that it has to have good relations with.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the Middle East right now, and I mean, think of the Biden record in this region. Iran has been allowed to get essentially nuclear capability. It hasn't quite seized that yet, but it's right there. Saudi Arabia has reestablished relations with Iran. It has had to hedge in that way. It's done so under the auspices of China, which is now a major player there. Meanwhile, President Biden is sort of undermining Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel, upsetting the Israelis, taking a firm side in a very polarized Israeli domestic policy issue. One by one, it seems like things are drifting the other way. And we're supposed to believe that the adults are back in charge on foreign policy, that this is the sort of mature foreign policy that our allies can now count on. Well,
maybe not.
Yeah, maybe not. Absolutely. And when this sort of thing happens, allies begin to hedge, begin to look elsewhere, begin to take things into their own hands, and we may not like that very much.
All right, let's turn to President Tsai's visit, the president of the Republic of China, otherwise known as Taiwan. Of course, this is not a formal visit because that is not allowed under American diplomatic rules. It's called a transit visit. She's on her way elsewhere. She's going to stop over in the U.S. She's done that a half dozen or so times. since her election. This is one of those diplomatic formulas designed to paper over the fact that we can't recognize formally Taiwan as a separate nation because that would violate the Shanghai Communique that the People's Republic of China agreed to many decades ago. So she will not meet with anybody in the administration, but she will speak at an event tonight in New York City, then on to D.C., and she'll meet members of Congress, among others, including House Speaker, we assume, Kevin McCarthy at some point. And that has upset China, which is warning some kind of response. Kim, the Speaker, do you think is going to meet with her? And what do you think of that?
He says he is, but it wouldn't be for a few more days yet, which might be why we're already seeing such an aggressive response from China trying to get people to back down. Because what she's going to do here is go to New York, as you said, D.C. Then she's headed off. This is actually being billed by her as a chance to demonstrate Taiwan's commitment to democratic values across the Americas. So after she goes to D.C., she's going to be going down to Guatemala and Belize, which happen to be two countries of a shrinking group of countries that still recognize Taiwan as a sovereign state. Then she's going to L.A., which is the point at which she would conceivably meet with Kevin McCarthy, because obviously he is a congressman from California. I have a couple of reasons I think you're seeing that the Chinese are already very aggressively coming out. They've already demanded that not only America refrain from arranging any of her transit visits, but even contacting her or being in communication with her whatsoever, which is kind of crazy. You had the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson say that they were going to resolutely defend national sovereignty and territorial integrity, and that there would be a response if she met with McCarthy. I think in my mind, I hope that the message that sends that it's all the more important that McCarthy meet with her so that it does not look as though America is bowing to these demands. Obviously, all of this comes in the wake of Nancy Pelosi's decision to go and visit Taiwan, which caused a really over-the-top response from China. They launched missiles over Taiwan, deployed warships across the median line in the Taiwan Straits, simulated an exercise in which they would blockade the island, and put, by the way, sanctions on Pelosi and members of her family for having done this visit. So we didn't back down then, and hopefully McCarthy goes ahead with what he said is likely to happen.
Kevin McCarthy at first said some weeks ago that he would go to Taiwan himself and meet with the president there and other officials. He has since backed off that, and probably prudently so, given the fact that we don't want to roil relations too much. On the other hand, he can't let the Chinese dictate his behavior, and meeting with her is something that I would think he's almost obliged to do now. Republicans are also criticizing this administration, Elliot, for not providing more weapons faster to Taiwan. We've pledged billions of dollars of weapons, but the U.S. delivery system, foreign sales machinery just bollocksed up. It's all going too slow, and they need it faster. The Biden administration is just not breaking that bureaucratic morass. And meanwhile, the balance of military power of the Taiwan Strait is moving more and more into the advantage of China.
That's right. And there are a lot of things that America wants Taiwan to be doing for its own defense. And we've made specific requests. We want them to spend more, to buy certain kinds of weapons that, like in the situation of Ukraine, will be more effective at warding off an invasion. But it's very difficult for us to make these requests when the Taiwanese say yes, and then we can't get them the weapons in the first place. So we're sort of getting the answer that we want from the Taiwanese, and then we're not delivering on the weapons. And so there seem to be huge issues there with the U.S. military industrial production. And part of that is just the will of Congress. Can we give a consistent budget, a reliable budget, so that manufacturers can invest and put in orders and produce more so that we can get weapons to our allies? Because the ultimate hope is that they shouldn't have to use them. If they have them and the Chinese know that they have them, an invasion becomes less likely. However, weakness is provocative. So whether we have meetings or not, that's a sort of, should we walk softly or heavily, but we should carry a big stick here. When we don't, we put freedom in Taiwan at risk.
The Taiwanese will have an election for president in January of 2024. Not too very far from now, President Tsai will not be running for re-election, but members of her party will in their competition, the Kuomintang Party, which was the old mainland party that was ousted by the communists on the mainland and governed for decades until the President Tsai's party took over, a more nationalist Taiwanese movement, native Taiwanese movement, which doesn't formally want independence, but wants de facto autonomy over its politics and has had that. So the Chinese, it's going to be interesting to see how the communists in China try to influence that election in January. They would love the Kuomintang to win that election. And they blew it the last time because they manhandled dissidents in Hong Kong that most Taiwanese observed happening and said, no, we don't want that here. And that helped President Tsai win re-election. So we'll have to watch that. It's a very volatile situation, and this next week or so will be very much worth watching and has some fraught political implications, both in the United States and, of course, in particular in Asia. So I want to thank Elliot Kaufman. I want to thank Kim Strassel. Thank you all for listening. We're back every day on Potomac Watch, and we'll be here tomorrow with more. Thanks for listening.